Good afternoon and welcome to the San Mateo Arboretum Society's hybrid seminar, Conserve My California and Save Water Every Day. The program will last approximately 60 to 90 minutes and be recorded. Questions will be answered at the end of the program. For those viewing on Zoom, submit your questions anytime by clicking on the chat box icon at the bottom of your screen. A few days after the presentation, you'll be emailed a link to the recording and an evaluation form. Before we start, a little information about what is happening at the Arboretum Society. Our nursery in San Mateo Central Park is open 12 to 3 on Saturdays and Sundays. Payment is by credit or debit card, Google and Apple Pay. No cash is accepted. The nursery is staffed by volunteers and may occasionally be closed. Check our website, sanmateoarboretum.org, or call 650-579-0536 for updated information. The Master Gardener Plant Clinic is scheduled from noon to 3 on the same day as our seminars through November. While you are in Central Park, visit the Rose Garden, Butterfly Hummingbird Garden, and our Sun and Shade demonstration gardens. All are maintained by the Arboretum Society volunteers. Our presenters today are Margaret Golden. She's the conservation coordinator for the California Water Service in the Bay Area. She received her bachelor's in natural resources and environmental science from the University of Illinois. Joining her will be Lauren McIrvin, CID, CIC, CLIA, et cetera, lots of initials after his name. Maybe he'll tell us what all of those are. He is owner and CEO of Allied Landscape. Lauren is recognized as a pioneer in approaching commercial landscape management in the San Francisco Bay Area from a sustainable and equitable perspective. I'm looking forward to learning how to have a healthy and beautiful landscape while conserving water. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, with that, we'll get started. Again, this is a hybrid presentation, so we have an audience in place and we have our Zoom audience. So bear with us as we switch back from camera to our audience. Today, we're helping out the San Mateo Arboretum Society by covering Conserve My California, Save Water Every Day. Slide transition. Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Margaret Golden. I am the Central Region Conservation Coordinator for the California Water Service.
And as was mentioned, my name is Lauren McIrvin. I'm with Allied Landscape. We are happy to be here. What we're going to really try to cover is a lot of topics, and that brings us to our agenda in terms of my background and how specifically my expertise helps is I'm a landscape contractor, an arborist, and very passionate about regenerative landscape practices and taking a different approach to how we maintain and install landscapes. On the agenda, as I mentioned, we've got a lot that we want to cover. This is really meant to serve as a broad conversation and cover a lot of topics and give everybody an opportunity to follow up with the resources that we're going to be offering. Initially, we're going to start with state of water in the landscape and California as a whole. We're going to start on that big picture approach and just cover what exactly is going on with the state of water in California as it stands. We're going to touch on conservation efforts with Cal Water, their bigger overarching program as it ties to all of what they have in terms of resources and programs available to the public. Then I'm going to touch on how to save water and money in a water efficient approach to landscape maintenance and management. Then we're going to touch on how to select the right plants. We're going to talk a little bit about the resources that are available to you from a plant selection process. And beyond that, touch on the importance of using natives whenever you can. We're going to wrap up by maintaining your landscape topic. This will be talking a little bit about what it is once your landscape is installed, including the infrastructure that maintains that from a water perspective, what you want to do in terms of the ongoing maintenance tied to it. We'll talk a little bit about how to find leaks. We'll talk a little bit about Cal Water's tune-up program, which is a very unique program tied to getting some external support to identify and fix things in your landscape. And then I'll touch on rescape and regenerative landscape practices. We'll bring it all together by talking a little bit about those water savings and some of the motivators that we've touched on throughout the presentation. And then a small demonstration tied to some of the irrigation components that you'll see in your landscape and how to adjust a nozzle. So in terms of the state of water, we've had an incredible amount of precipitation and rain, which is absolutely fantastic. Coming off of what was another drought, it was fantastic to see all of our Bay Area water supplies be restored from a reservoir standpoint and a snowpack standpoint. So in terms of the state of water, as it stands, we're doing in really good shape as it relates to our stored water supply above ground. Groundwater, unfortunately, that is doing, we're very low levels when it comes to groundwater. We're going to touch on the importance of that in a coming slide. Water infrastructure. Part of why we want to talk about the big picture here is it's not just about us having the capacity to store water, have water in a wet year, but it's also what groundwater looks like. But it also, from a risk standpoint, what the infrastructure is behind getting the water from the reservoirs to our taps. The reason why that's important is when you're thinking about water efficiency and trying to reduce cost, you really need to calculate in the year-over-year increases that come with keeping that infrastructure up. Some of our water districts or water providers in the Bay Area have systems that are up around the 100-year mark at this point. So they're very expansive, they're aging, and it requires a lot of investment that inevitably finds its way to the end user and is important when you're starting to calculate, well, do I put those solar panels on, or do I do this project, or should I really start looking at saving water in the landscape from an investment standpoint? We're going to talk a little bit about state regulations and how that impacts us. I'll give you a quick example. We want our landscapes to be ready for future regulation. We have all gone through droughts in California over the last 15 years. And in some of those droughts, we've had the state reach out for good reason and say, you can only water twice a week. Well, it's important to have our landscapes designed and maintained in a way that when those regulations come, that we're ready for it. So it's not just about saving water, it's about making a landscape that's resilient and adaptable to future regulations that might be put down to the end user. Climate change impacts. I've got a slide to talk about that, but climate change is making it to where we are having hotter weather. We are having more extreme weather events like we experienced this last year when it came to intense rainstorms. So keeping in mind climate change and the overall impact it has on our water supply, our landscapes, again, it's about a discussion around building a resilient landscape and recognizing that there is a big picture that needs to be thought about and needs to be planned for. So those future climate change impacts really needs to be part of the thought process and a part of the conversation. And then beyond that, just California's history as it relates to droughts. And in 2 slides, I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like for California over the last 70 years. And then the future of the Bay Area and California landscape. Change is needed, and that's what this topic's all about. So in terms of our current water supply as it relates to reservoirs, we're doing pretty good. We've got 50 million acre feet in California that we can store, and we did a great job at filling that up for the most part around the state. But where we're really low, and this is a big issue, is where the real storage capacity is for California has everything to do with the groundwater basin. As you can see, we can store water 50 million acre feet above water in reservoirs. But when it comes to groundwater, 1.3 billion, and those are reservoirs that in most cases are depleted. If you take a look down the Central Valley, all of those red marks, and this is as of 2 to 3 months ago, all of those are indicators of groundwater supply levels. That's pretty daunting. And then when you take a look at over the course of the years, groundwater is one of those things that has definitely been diminishing in a very scaled way, straight to dangerous levels. So when it comes to our climate history, that I think is part of the conversation, well, I talked a little bit about climate change and the impacts that it has on us in terms of those weather extremes. But just in terms of our California history, outside of climate change, you can see that we have a history of a few wet years, but a whole lot of dry years. So what's part of our California history is droughts. It is extended periods of weather that needs to be accounted for. And when we talk a little bit about an English garden, or when we talk a little bit about grass in California, this is the challenging component, that outside of climate change, we have histories of extended drought. In terms of temperature rise, you can see that this graph starts in the 1950s, and you can see the spikes over the years as we trend warmer and warmer as a state.
Okay, so thank you for giving that great kind of introduction, Lauren, to the history of water in California in general. And so now we're going to kind of jump into what we're here today to talk about, which is the Conserve My California, Save Water Every Day. And so this great slide shows a great graph from the American Water Works Association showing, and this is a national average, residential average water use. It comes out to just about 60% of water that residents use is for outdoor purposes, such as irrigation. So that's a pretty significant number. And so that's kind of like the big number that we're here today to talk about. And then also actually in California, it's closer to 70% of our residential water use is used outdoors. So even greater water use. So yes, it's clearly a significant amount. And that's what we're really here today to talk about, is to how to get that lower and to really work on our water savings. I think we're going to take questions at the end.
Quick questions?
Do you have a question?
On the previous slide, it's just the recycled, like a different kind of water, like a toilet water, and the rest is like a drinking water.
Could you repeat the question for the audience?
Yeah, could you repeat the question?
No, you.
I think I would.
Sure. No, I'm happy to.
Is it?
So in terms of this particular graph, and again, it's a little bit different for California, it's closer to 75% for that green portion of the graph. But the question that was posed is the toilet water recycled water, correct? Do I have that right?
No, the green, the outdoor is kind of water. Right?
No, actually, and that's the problem. It is tap water. It is treated tap water. And that's the hard part that we really need to grapple with. That at the end of the day, it's a great question that, wow, are we really using 59 to 75% of our fresh treated water for landscape?
Yes.
The answer to that is yes. And that's why it's so important.
Yes.
Like a recycle.
No.
Quality water.
Nope.
No, unfortunately.
No, it's just water allocation for a typical home. Any home, by and large, if they have just a moderate-sized landscape, especially if it has grass, in an arid climate like California, they're using upwards of 50 to 70% of their water in a typical residence just for outdoor use.
What about the roads and all that? It's all,
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're going to get closer. But I hope that answers your question.
But yeah, so with that said, I also agree. It's definitely sad. So that's kind of why what we're here today to talk about. So yeah, this is just a quick little slide to reiterate the kind of thesis of this presentation, the Conserve My California, Save Water Every Day. At Cal Water, we really try to promote water conservation as a way of life for Californians. And yeah, to emphasize that the smallest changes can really make a big difference. And yeah, as that's evidence on the slide, we have a statistic showing that customers who participated in our rebate programs between 2016 and 2020 will have helped California save over 9.2 billion gallons of water over their lifetime, which is clearly a very significant amount. So yeah, and again, we like to promote these programs, whether we're technically in a drought or not, because we want to promote conservation as a way of life for Californians, no matter the state of the drought.
Okay, so I really appreciate the question, and it's one of those things that because Margaret and I live in that kind of water use landscape world, that we're used to seeing these figures. And while it really upsets us and we're looking for change in terms of a water use perspective for current generations, future generations, that some of it is just astonishing. And then to hear somebody in the audience say, wow, really? Are we really using 50 to 75% on the outdoor landscape use? And that's tap water, treated water? Is that how we're using it? So I appreciate the comment. Which brings us to another slide, and that is in terms of the amount of water that could be saved, there is a prescribed method tied to new building codes under the name Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, which we're going to touch on. But I thought that this particular slide is pretty powerful as well. As much as 50% of the water that is used outdoor is wasted from inefficient watering methods. It's absolutely true. One of those acronyms that are tied to my name is a water conservation manager and a certified irrigation water auditor. And what that means is we go out to landscapes and we put out a bunch of measuring devices in the landscape and we turn on the water and we see how inefficiently water is being applied or how unevenly it's being applied. And inevitably, what you end up finding is something that's close to this, that irrigation system is operating at 50% efficiency and has everything to do with proper execution, proper maintenance, and you end up with a portion of your grass or a portion of a planter with a lot of water, and then a portion of your landscape without water. So inevitably, what you do to keep those plants alive is you turn up the irrigation controller to try to keep these plants alive. Meanwhile, now you're overwatering issue. You've got an overwatering issue. So another slide that I think is powerful, and it's absolutely the truth that 50% of the water that we apply from a standard conventional irrigation system is absolutely wasted and has everything to do with the approach and the maintenance of the system. So with that, I want to touch on the anatomy of an irrigation system. And I'm going to go over this briefly and not try to make this too much, but essentially in a simple way of looking at an irrigation system is it comes in from Cal Water right here through the water meter. They make sure that they supply you a certain amount of water pressure and water is available to your house at all times, which is absolutely fantastic. It works through the irrigation system, and in a commercial setting, there's a backflow prevention device that keeps water from going back into the potable water. The reason why that's important is if we're applying fertilizers on, let's say, an upper slope, and there is a break in the irrigation supply, that can create a back siphonage into the irrigation system and theoretically back into the water supply. So building codes dictate that there's some type of device that keeps water only going in one direction to keep the potable water supply safe. There's a couple add-on items here for the future of landscapes, and that is a master valve and a flow meter talking to your irrigation system and telling you, hey, this is how much water is moving through your irrigation system, and it's only supposed to have 22 gallons a minute, but right now you're operating at 28 gallons a minute. There must be a broken sprinkler. So we're going to shut the system down and tell the end user by way of the irrigation controller. Now, what is typical for some of the audience in this group is it goes straight from the water meter directly to anti-siphon valves that might be located on the side of your house or out in the landscape. And again, this device is a form of a backflow prevention device where the water comes up through the back and down into the landscape. With the idea that if that back siphonage occurs, that the water will flush out of that little air vent. With that, this is the on and off, right? This powers and allows water to either go to the sprinklers or to those drip tubings or to some type of rotating device. But ultimately, those valves with the little wires coming out of them just open and close, allow water to go into the pipes or be held back. What tells those irrigation valves what to do is the irrigation controller. This is typically located in your garage, on the side of your garage, and it has wires that connects to those irrigation remote control valves, and it sends an electrical current when to turn on and electrical current when to turn off. Sophisticated smart controllers will have some type of weather device or a rain sensor, or potentially a soil moisture sensor. The way I like to look at an irrigation controller is it's akin to a thermostat to a certain extent, and your plant material is either getting too warm or has plenty of water. If it's getting too warm, the thermostat kicks it on and tells the system that, hey, we've got to send cool air in, or we've got to send water to those plants. But the way I like to look at it as an irrigation controller is no different than a thermostat, an on and an off. The way typical conventional irrigation controllers work is they are programmed with a set schedule, not unlike unsophisticated thermostats, in that you tell the thermostat or the irrigation controller, I would like you to come on 3 days a week. I'm home at this time. I want the air conditioner or heater to come on at this time because this is typically when I'm home. It's no different for the irrigation controller. I know that my plants like to have water 3 days a week. I typically water 3 days a week for 10 minutes, and it goes through that program and sends that current to those valves and applies the water with what you have programmed in. Now, here's the tricky part. The tricky part with an old thermostat or a conventional old controller is that it doesn't account for weather changes. It doesn't account for things that change. For an irrigation controller, that has everything to do with temperature, has everything to do with weather conditions. If we received a little bit of rain, you'd want that irrigation controller to know, well, I know you operate 3 days a week, but you don't need to this week because we received a little unseasonal rain and you don't need to water this week. The same would be akin to the thermostat. I'm typically home at this time, but we're going to be on vacation. I need to change that programming. I think what you want in both an irrigation controller and thermostat is sensors to be aware of what's going on, either in the landscape for the irrigation, or the analogy with the thermostat, are you in and out of the house? And will automatically adjust how the thermostat is running based on data, real data. I think the real challenging part to consider when it comes to a standard irrigation controller is, by and large, they are adjusted 3 times a year. By and large, they're adjusted 3 times a year. We inevitably have temperature spikes and temperature drops that standardized programming doesn't account for. So the concept of having a smart, self-adjusting controller can help you better adjust according to real conditions. So almost done on the anatomy of an irrigation system. Once the controller turns on those remote control valves, it allows water to move through these, in our area, typically PVC pipe. That rigid pipe brings water to the emission points, which is a pop-up sprinkler or a rotary sprinkler, but the water travels through those pipes to get there. Once it's there, you either have a kind of a conventional pop-up sprinkler. This is an older technology that is still found in a lot of landscapes. This particular device that's found in a lot of landscapes, and this is important to consider, is only about 50 to 65% efficient in most cases, straight from the manufacturer. And that has everything to do with trying to get the water droplets to fall in an even pattern over a given area. Again, visualize that water audit I described and putting out all those catch can devices or all those measuring devices, turning on one sprinkler. And even at their best, they're operating at, on the very low end, 50 to 65%. For some of the higher efficiency nozzles, we might get up to 65, 75%. But that is without wind. That is without a sprinkler being tilted because of a lawnmower hitting it. That is in the ideal conditions. That the best you're going to get out of this sprinkler is about 75% efficiency, and that's if everything is perfect. Well, you have to compensate for that manufacturing inefficiency, not being able to apply those droplets evenly over a given space. you need to compensate for that by overwatering. So again, you're in this situation where some areas are getting too much water, where the water droplets are falling in a bigger quantity than in lighter areas. The next thing from a manufacturing standpoint or an efficiency standpoint is if you see these type of nozzles, these are rotating nozzles that are a little bit better at applying water evenly over a given space and a little bit better dealing with wind. So the concept of finding a sprinkler nozzle that can do a better job than what you likely have in place, this is an easy thing to do. And Margaret's going to talk a little bit later on a future slide about a program that she has available to do just that. And then lastly, I want to touch on drip irrigation. And drip low volume irrigation is really the future of what irrigation should look like. And the reason being is, instead of throwing the water up into the air and hoping that the water droplet lands where it's supposed to land, and oftentimes based on wind, based on the sprinkler not being installed just plumb or straight, it throws those water droplets where they're not supposed to go. Whereas drip irrigation has tubing that just allows a water droplet to fall just outside of the tubing. So it's not traveling up and through the air, it's applying water directly to the soil surface, and ideally just to the root zone or just beyond the existing root zone of the plant material. Okay, now I know this is a heavy slide and we talked about us covering a lot of concepts, and I'm glad that you guys will have access to this presentation for future reference because there's a lot of information on this slide. Again, I touched on the water efficient landscape ordinance put together by the state of California. This was really put into effect in a meaningful way in 2015 for California from a building code perspective. So that is to say, if you went to go install a new landscape at your house, at your property, you would have to adhere to new standards. This is no different than building standards that evolve and change for inside of a structure. That is to say, efficiency tied to windows, efficiencies tied to insulation, efficiencies tied to even the type of, if you're talking about the consumer world, the type of refrigerator that you're allowed to sell in California. So conceptually speaking, what this ordinance is all about is adhering to certain ways of installing and designing a landscape that conserves water. And I'm going to touch on some of them because I think it's important and it's something that you can refer back to. No turf on slopes more than 25%. Reason being is watering turf on a slope that's 25%. It's hard to keep the water to stay. It just rolls right off in most instances. So that's a tricky situation. Beyond that, depending on the orientation of that 25% slope, it could be a lot like a solar panel. The solar panel could be faced just to catch the bulk of our sun. And you could really end up with a situation where that sloped turf is using an inordinate amount of water. No turf, meaning grass, in planted areas less than 10 feet. The reason for that is it's very hard for irrigation manufacturers to design an irrigation nozzle that does a great job at irrigating small spaces. They're a little bit more efficient from a manufacturing standpoint and a distribution uniformity standpoint for anything that's bigger than that. So if you have these small irrigation nozzles, if you have these small strips of grass, they are terribly inefficient in terms of how the water is typically applied to those spaces. Another piece is no invasive plants are installed, that we're amending the soil. And I think that this is something that really gets lost on the conversation when it comes to irrigation management, and that's soil building. The concept of how soils should be built and how they should be maintained is the concept of creating soil sponges. The concept of having organic matter that can hold on to water. The concept of having a soil type, unlike some of what we find in the Bay Area that's heavily clay that doesn't allow water to penetrate. So building soil, incorporating organic matter, making sure that we're working towards building soils versus just having dirt is a really important concept. And it has everything to do with getting organic matter into that soil. We need to have 3 inches of mulch. 3 inches of mulch, it's amazing how much mulch will conserve in terms of water. It reduces the amount of evaporation that we have from the soil surface. Beyond that, it creates homes for small digging insects, very tiny small digging insects that help further create these soil sponges. The concept of having organic matter breaking down from a mulch layer and working its way into the soil by way of beneficial insects is a big win and is something that we should all be striving for in our landscapes. Next is the irrigation controller, again, to get through today's building standards, to get through building code requirements from an efficiency standpoint, we should have ET controllers or smart controllers or self-adjusting controllers. The concept of a controller or that thermostat analogy changing based on the soil conditions or the weather conditions that tells the controller, okay, we need to apply water again. But something that's done from a place of sensor versus old history. Yes, ma'am. So if you were to build a new HOA,
Like old houses, but HOA.
no, it's only for new building code as it stands. If it went through the permitting process for a big renovation, it very well could be caught in a building code situation for permitting purposes. But as it stands, if you have an existing landscape, you do not need to adhere to these. But the question is, why not? If I didn't have to have a high efficiency toilet or a high efficiency refrigerator or a high efficiency windows, I would do it even if I wasn't required to do it. And that's what these building codes are all about, the concept of protecting the consumer against waste. And then in a bigger sense, protecting the state as a whole against water waste for the benefit of others. So again, if it's a bigger landscape, it needs to have a flow sensor. Irrigation pressure needs to be thought about and addressed. And this is something I'd like to share with everybody in the audience and in our Zoom audience. And that is, by and large, irrigation systems do not function correctly because they have too much pressure in the Bay Area. We have too much pressure. A lot of these irrigation systems are meant to be working at 30 PSI, 30 pounds of pressure at the device itself. When I go and audit irrigation systems, by and large, what we're finding is those irrigation components that should be at 30 PSI are running at 55 to 65 PSI. What that does, and the way you can see it in your landscape, is your sprinklers pop up and you almost see this fog. You see the water atomizing too much. The problem with that is the manufacturers have made their irrigation nozzles to create droplets of a certain size at a certain pressure to fall at a certain place in space. When you heavily increase the irrigation pressure to any irrigation system, it distorts how things are supposed to work. And again, then you get back to that slide of irrigation systems working at 50% less than they should be, and now we're wasting water to compensate for that. So something to consider. Let me touch on a couple more of these real quick. Runoff. This will be the last one I want to touch on, but the concept of runoff and low head drainage and the concept of programming your irrigation controller correctly is important. Low head drainage is this phenomenon is where the irrigation system shuts off and all of the water moves through the irrigation system and dribbles out the lowest point or the lowest sprinkler. That can create a trip hazard. That could apply a lot more water to lower points of the landscape. And then again, a situation of too much water or not enough water. So something to watch out for. Okay, so the next slide I want to touch on is the concept of furthering the conversation around this smart controller or self-adjusting controller. Smart irrigation practices, in my opinion, start with that irrigation controller. As inefficient as a lot of things can be, elsewhere in the irrigation system where I showed you the PVC pipe could have small cracks in it. The sprinklers could be tilted and not applying water correctly. There could be minor leaks. They really are just exacerbated by an irrigation controller that applies too much water. So the best thing you can do is start with getting a self-adjusting irrigation controller to minimize the overall amount of water that you're applying to a landscape. Now, it's not a silver bullet, but it is the best place to start, from my opinion. And what's critical about self-adjusting controllers is the concept of adjusting them in or calibrating them or dialing them in from a percentage standpoint. And that is to say, if I install a self-adjusting controller, part of it is programming what's in place. But I'm a believer of the best way to know how much water is required for a plant is you out in the landscape with your boots on, taking a look at plants and stressing them just slightly to understand where their stress point is, and then giving a little bit of extra water on a full landscape basis. That is to say that I'm going through each different valve on a smart controller and figuring out, okay, I put all the theoretical information in, I've got all these fancy sensors, everything I think is working the way it's supposed to be. But I need to go listen to the plants. I need to walk out into the landscape and I need to look at each plant on a per valve basis and scale that to the point of making sure that we're truly applying the right amount of water, not from a theoretical standpoint, but from a truly tested and calibrated standpoint. Again, Margaret and Cal Water have rebates that are available to help with the initial investment in a smart controller, and she'll talk a little bit about that in a coming slide. Next thing is high efficiency nozzles. I talked in a previous slide about how a standard nozzle, and that would be a standard irrigation sprinkler that pops up in the landscape and the nozzle applies that water. We talked a little bit out of the gates about how difficult it is for that to be efficiency, to have a high efficiency and to do a good job from a manufacturing standpoint and from just a real world wind situation and maintenance perspective. So the concept of trying to take your conventional irrigation system and start with a self-adjusting control, and then take a look at some of the most inefficient components of the irrigation system and inefficient portions of the landscape where you have this situation where you have some areas that have too much water and some areas that don't have enough, and fixing that. The way you can do that from an irrigation infrastructure standpoint has everything to do with putting more efficient components tied to it. So starting with that pop-up sprinkler, moving to a high efficiency rotary nozzle, which is a very low ask, very easy from a labor standpoint, that would be your next move. And then beyond that is, okay, well, how do I get out of using those pop-up sprinklers at all and move to drip irrigation? And then part of the conversation is, well, how do I get away from some of the thirsty plants to some non-thirsty plants? And do I have areas where I've got some plants that are thirsty and some plants that are not? So that's important. The last thing on this slide that I wanted to touch on is this visual depiction of what I was describing before. And that is an irrigation that is programmed 4 times a year would look like this. Here's my 3 days and I'm running for 10 minutes. And then as I get into the summer, I water 5 days a week and I crank it up a little bit to 15 minutes. But you can see with real conditions, all of those 365 days where the weather conditions or the water requirement needed for those plants really weren't being adjusted for on a daily basis. So all of this equates to waste. Anything above those white lines equates to a terrible amount of waste when you don't use a self-adjusting controller.
All right. Well, thank you for all that great information, Lauren. And as he had mentioned just previously, I just wanted to note that, yeah, Cal Water actually has a ton of different rebate programs available. And so, yeah, we specifically have one for the smart irrigation controller, like Lauren was talking about. We'll rebate up to $125. We have a whole pre-approved device list on our website, so you can check it out. And there's a link to the application as well, super easy, just fill it out. And yeah, you get rebated that amount. And we also have one for the high efficiency sprinkler nozzle as well, up to $5 per nozzle. Also have the devices listed on our website. And then, yeah, we also have the spray to drip rebate, which will rebate you up to 50 cents per square foot of drip or spray sprinkler systems that you convert to drip irrigation. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in some later slides with the lawn to garden program, because usually those are coupled together. But yeah, as Lauren was saying, the spray to drip is really a great opportunity. It can save up to between 20 and 50% of water can be saved by switching from spray irrigation to drip irrigation.
And I think for context, something worth mentioning is I helped out a neighbor over the weekend who had an irrigation controller go bad, and they needed to purchase a new self-adjusting controller. The controller that we purchased was a 14-station controller, and it was $365. That was Wi-Fi enabled, smart controller, great manufacturer. So you can see that 125 does a pretty decent job on that. In terms of those high efficiency sprinkler nozzles, those rotating ones, well, they run about $6 if you were to go buy them from an irrigation distributor. So the concept of having Cal Water cover $5 on a nozzle that costs around $6 for materials, that's a pretty powerful rebate. And then the spray to drip, this is a little nuanced, so I don't want to mislead you here. But again, I think it's free monies that do not get used enough for making improvements in your yard, and something that should be taken advantage of. Okay, next. So we talked a little bit about the irrigation components, and that's a really important part of things. But I think if I was to boil down the most important thing from a design standpoint or creating a new landscape, and to a certain extent, even retrofitting or fixing an existing wasteful landscape, it's about having the right plant in the right place. And that sounds simple, but having the right plant in the right place is incredibly important. And I want to expand a little bit on what that means. The right plant in the right place is, I choose a plant that is appropriate for our Mediterranean climate in the Bay Area, right? That is appropriate for the sun exposure that I intend to put it in. That is appropriate from a size perspective on where I plan to place it. Because from a maintenance perspective, you can really drive water usage when you have the wrong plant in the wrong spot. And what I mean by that is, if I take a plant that prefers part shade, but I put it in full sun, to keep it alive, I might need to compensate by overwatering it. If I take a plant that wants to get big and I put it in a small space, and I have to continually trim it to get it to fit within that space, and I have to turn it into a little sphere or a little shape, what that does is it creates a situation that flushes out new growth that is more sensitive to sun exposure. It uses a little bit more water as it pushes out that new growth. So the concept of getting the right plant in the right place is just supremely important when it comes to designing and building a landscape. Now, when it comes to what I suggest and some of the resources that I would go to, one, I would suggest, if you can make it work, use California natives. And I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide because I think the native conversation warrants more of a conversation. California natives don't have to be something that you might be visualizing as if it's a succulents or a cacti garden. California is a big state, and the Bay Area with its Mediterranean climate can really support a lot of natives. And I think more than anything, the imperative tied to California natives has everything to do with beneficial insects. At the end of the day, there's a crisis tied to native insect populations, whether that's the butterfly, whether that's bee populations, whether that is just some of the unique ecosystem that we have that makes the Bay Area so diverse and beautiful. We are getting rid of so many natives at an alarming rate that a lot of our birds, for example, don't have the types of insects that they need to eat. So our bird populations are dwindling. We don't have all those beneficial insects that I talked about in terms of building soil and having this kind of regenerative process tied to how landscapes work and building those soil sponges. I would encourage anybody to really consider natives. And being here at the San Mateo Arboretum, you really have a unique opportunity to visit their nursery. Great supply of natives. For the people that are attending us in person, we've got a couple flags out there in the nursery that say seminar on them. I would really encourage you to take a look at the yarrows that are out there. There's some salvias that are out there. You can find them in the nursery. All of the pots are red in color versus black. So the concept of giving those natives a chance and really working with natives over species that work in the Bay Area, but really don't offer the same benefits. For example, the Mediterranean climate is South Africa. It's obviously the Mediterranean. It's portions of Australia. But we can get those plants to work just fine in our area. But I think the concept of sticking with our natives the best that we can is really important. But it does require a little bit of energy and effort as it pertains to the maintenance and irrigating of those plants. They do need irrigation, even though they're native plants. They've been propagated and grown in a nursery setting, so they need to be set and acclimated to a natural native environment where you can eventually turn off the water. But the concept of natives is really important. I think outside of wildlife, you can, again, reduce maintenance, you can reduce their carbon footprint, pesticide uses go down, and obviously we reduce water consumption because we're putting a plant that is evolved to our area. So back a slide. Outside of using natives, there's a couple resources that I wanted to highlight. And one is the Cal Water website. You have an opportunity to look at plant lists that will help you in your landscape design planning. And then I also would push you to WUCLs, and that's an acronym for, let me see if I can remember this. This is water use. Oh, give me 1 second.
Classification of landscape species.
Saved me. I thought, no, it's great. And so the concept behind it is there's a lot of work and energy that was put into this website to really judge how much water is truly required for different species. So this is a unique platform that is species specific and allows you to really understand how you might group different plants together, whether that's very low usage or medium usage, and you have tons of search criteria. So again, thanks for the help with the acronym, but WUCLs is a great opportunity to help you find and plan and fix your landscape. In terms of a quick conversation around, functional turf versus non-functional turf. Part of the most recent drought situation that we had at the tail end of last year, the state of California came out and said, we want to eventually ban the use of water on non-functional turf in a commercial and homeowners association setting. And that is to say that if grass is not used for recreation or has a specific use, that we are not using it in the state of California because our climate just doesn't allow for it. So it comes back to this concept of right plant in the right place. And what I can say is outside of recreational use, turf does not work in the state of California. That said, I do believe getting people out in the landscape in a recreational sense is really important. So if it's being used for sports, if it's being used for clever ways to get folks out into their landscape and enjoying it, I do see that being a beneficial use, and I would consider keeping it in those small instances on a limited basis. So native plants, we touched on this a little bit, but I did want to touch on a concept of adopting regenerative landscape practices for the benefit of the environment. For me, I work in the landscape industry. We need to adopt these practices and do a better job. I think native plants are one of the biggest components of regenerative landscape, and it's critical to regenerate some of the ecosystem that we have in place that is dwindling and needs help right away. This is another resource that I wanted to direct everybody to, and that is rescape.org. This is a statewide program that offers regenerative landscape practices and 8 guiding principles for designing and maintaining a landscape. So the concept of having them all start with acting local, reducing waste as part of the conversation and the design and maintenance, nurturing the soil, which we touched on, having a landscape that can sequester carbon, the concept of going to artificial turf or the concept of going to rock. I think we're missing the point there from a larger environmental standpoint. Saving water, conserving energy, protecting water, and creating habitat. That's the big one we're trying to drive home with on the natives. Okay, with that, it brings me back to what I started talking about, and that is the functional turf versus non-functional turf. We have a situation that as a state, we really need to invest in getting rid of some of the turf, and the state is doing just that. But I think more than anything, it's a mindset that we need to work around, that is landscapes can still be absolutely beautiful. They don't require turf. We don't need acres and acres of grass that are inappropriate for our climate to have a beautiful landscape. Okay, Margaret, do you want to talk a little bit about your program tied to lawn to garden or getting rid of that grass?
Yeah, so yeah, with everything that Lauren has said so far, we really support and believe everything that he's already talked about with regard to the native plants and really emphasizing the native plants and removing your garden or your turf if possible. So one of Cal Water's largest rebate programs is our lawn to garden program, where you can be rebated up to $3 per square foot of lawn that you remove, as long as 50% is converted to drought tolerant landscape. And a lot of people also typically couple it with the spray to drip program that we also have available. So usually customers can be rebated up to $3.50 per square foot if they also convert their spray systems to drip systems. Overall, it's a great program. It's really successful. And like Lauren was saying, we really also emphasize the native plants as well. We do not accept some important parts of the program. We do not accept artificial turf. And that's another reason why we make sure that at least 50% of the converted landscape is converted to drought tolerant landscaping, because we really also value the environmental benefits of having plants and not just scorched landscape. So with this program, we're trying to incentivize people to not only save water, but to help the surrounding environment and the biodiversity of the local environment as well. Moving on to the next slide. Lauren also touched on this already a little bit too, but like he said, we also have a pre-qualified list of plants on our website as well, with over 2,000 plants on this database of local native plants that you can choose from. And the program is really great too. Within the portal where you apply, we've got a lot of great kind of calculators and advanced technology built into the portal. So when you're selecting plants from this extensive list, it will automatically give you the square footage of area that you're taking up, and it will also make sure that it's spacing the square footage on the full grown size of the plant as well, which is what we determined the 50% by. But ideally you can make it 100%, but the minimum requirement is 50% with the native plants. We also like to really encourage this database. Like I said, over 2,000 plants available that, again, like Lauren was saying, I think in years past, people would think that drought tolerant, if you don't have a garden, you have to have cactuses, and that's just not the case. There's just thousands of options, literally, that you can choose from, a variety of different colors and aesthetics. And so, yeah, we really just like to encourage people, provide the financial incentive, but also, yeah, that you can have the aesthetic value and stay financially, have a beautiful aesthetic value and save water too. So really, it's a win-win-win. And yeah, we'd love to support people doing that. And then, yeah, as Lauren had also mentioned, the WCALS database is a great resource that we like to promote as well. So yeah, the database that we have on our website are all pre-qualified already, through Cal Water. But yeah, we like to promote the WCALS as well because it's an even more extensive, I think, even more thousands of plants they have available on their database. And like you said, they are organized by low, very low, or moderate water use. And yeah, I think you can even specify based on your very specific region. So not only California native, but native to specifically the Bay Area, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's an awesome resource that we like to promote as well. And yeah, help everyone get as many native plants around them as possible.
Okay. Excuse me. So now we'll get into kind of a little bit of review, but I think part of the request as this talk goes is we wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about how to inspect an irrigation system, but it's not unlike some of the information that we covered in terms of designing an irrigation system. So a little bit of this will be a quick review. When we go and we maintain a landscape and we look for issues with our from a water waste perspective or plant health perspective, we do start with hydrozones. And this is the concept of reviewing the landscape and putting things into groups based on one, sun exposure, two, plant type and water requirement. So the concept of having things grouped based on sun exposure, based on the water requirement, based on how you're applying the water currently. It's a critically important concept. In this bottom picture, we see a guy adjusting a sprinkler. This is probably somebody who had grass along their driveway and decided to add an ornamental planter along the way. Well, they have one sprinkler that sprays grass that's very thirsty against some type of ornamental plant that inevitably has deeper root zones and can probably go longer without watering cycles. So it doesn't need as much water as the adjacent grass, but it's being watered as the same. So we start by looking for mixed hydrozones. How were things designed, or how are things now that just don't make sense based on like groups? Really important. And then we dig into some of the irrigation components. Again, we talked a little bit about how a sprinkler pops up and applies water to an area. Well, it pops up and it doesn't apply water evenly to a soil profile. So it needs to have sprinklers that are laid out in a head-to-head way for full coverage to compensate for the inefficiencies. And that is to say that if I have a sprinkler and I'm watering grass, that this sprinkler, its water droplets need to touch all the way over here to apply water evenly. What impacts how nozzles work, again, is too much pressure or too little pressure, and it starts warping how the water is being applied. So you really have those inefficiencies tied to that. A couple more concepts: high pressure, low pressure, we talked about it. Matched precipitation rates, the concept of having each sprinkler apply the same amount of water for the given space. That's done on a manufacturing and design standpoint. But from a maintenance standpoint, when my company comes into a commercial landscape, like a homeowners association, we'll go through and we'll start taking a look at, wow, what has happened? 70% of this system was installed this way, but somebody inadvertently installed this, this, and this, and these apply way more water than the 70% that was original. So the concept of matched precipitation rate, the concept of not having mixed emission devices. If we're saying that the standard pop-up sprinklers apply water at, let's say, 2 inches, 2 inches per hour, And we've got drip irrigation that applies water much slower. You can't have mixed irrigation type of having one type of sprinkler that applies water really fast and another type of irrigation device that applies water very slowly. It just doesn't match. You're going to be watering too much or too little some way. So we look for that mixed irrigation or emission devices. Again, we look for head-to-head coverage. We look for uneven head spacing. Again, they need to be laid out in a geometric way, with head-to-head coverage being the goal. We look for broken and missing nozzles, tilted sprinklers, heads below grade, blocked spray. This is a perfect example of, we've got a sprinkler here. Well, what if they put a shrub? What if this shrub just continues to grow laterally and starts to block some of the sprinkler and doesn't allow the sprinkler to water the grass on the other side of it? So the concept of, are the sprinkler heads being blocked with any type of plant material? And that includes the grass blades. In some instances, we have little micro pop-ups that are popping up 2, 3, 4 inches, and the grass blades in the California area are typically mowed at 3.5 inches. So if you don't have a pop-up sprinkler that's popping up high enough to clear the grass blades, well, then again, we're applying water very inefficiently. Looking for clogged nozzles, a bunch of things to look for. Now, here's the good news. After this big list, well, let me hit you with some more. After this extended big list of broken pipes, broken things, clogged things, Cal Water has a unique program that is tied to doing just that. And maybe Margaret, you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, that's right. So this is one of our other really great big programs that we have available. It's really unique in its comprehension as well. I think it's pretty all inclusive and yeah, very comprehensive. So basically what it is it's our smart landscape tune-up program. So basically what happens is customers can apply online, both residential and commercial. It's available to all of our customers. Apply online and a licensed landscape contractor comes out to your house completely free of charge and checks for all the things that Lauren was mentioning, such as breaks or leaks in your system, anywhere in your irrigation, and also makes recommendations for new high efficiency equipment that can help you save water as well. And so then the contractor brings recommendations back to Cal Water, and one of our professionals makes sure everything checks out. And then as long as everything checks out, the contractor goes back out to the customer's home and makes all the adjustments completely free of charge to the customer. So yeah, it's a really awesome program. Like I said, very comprehensive. You can get a complete kind of workup of your whole system. And yeah, I think it's important to remember, like, go back to the big 50% number that we were talking about in the beginning of the slides, that 50% of your water can be wasted just by having leaks in your system that you don't even know about. Tons of customers will call us with high water bills and not really know, think of, oh gosh, like I'm not sure why my water bill is so high, for instance. And typically more often than not, it has to do with some type of leak in their outdoor irrigation. So yeah, we think this is a great program. And yeah, I really emphasize anyone to take advantage of it now. It came to fruition during the last drought. So I think, yeah, some of our programs can fluctuate depending on the state of the drought and things like that. So I encourage customers to take advantage of it now while it's still going on. People really love it.
And that's a good segue to a slide I just jumped ahead, and we'll get right back to Margaret. That is worth touching on, and the concept of leaks that you don't know about. So you have an opportunity at your house with your water meter to get at whether or not leaks exist in your landscape system. This small low flow indicator, or what we call a leak detector, gives you the opportunity to see even the most minute amount of water working its way through the system. So the way this typically gets used for us is we go to the house and we shut off the water to the house. And then we look at it and see, okay, is that little guy going? Because if it's going, we eliminated the house and we know that there's a leak either in the piping that gets from the meter to the landscape or where that valve was to shut it off at the house, or it's within one of those remote control valves. So the concept of using your water meter that you currently have in place to determine if you have a leak outdoors, really powerful tool. And you can do just the opposite. If you can shut off your irrigation system and then take a look if it's spinning, and now you know you've got something that's leaking in the house. And it's amazing how much water can be wasted with a running toilet.
Yeah,
It's an incredible amount of water waste because it's just nonstop. So seeing and finding these mainline leaks, critical piece. In time, water providers will have some type of digital version that will give you alerts and tell you what's going on and send you a text message. That technology is not quite there yet. It's not fully implemented. The technology works. We have a portion of the systems that we maintain that we get text messages, we get emails saying, hey, something's up here. Computer just recognized you've got some type of leak, you need to find it. So great opportunity there. And Margaret, you want to go back to yours?
Yeah, so kind of, just continuing on with the really exceptional smart landscape tuna program, just a few quotes from customers themselves who really enjoyed the program. Kind of just talking about how it really worked out for them. And yeah, they're very grateful for it. So continuing on, like I said, all of our rebates are available to both our residential, commercial, and industrial customers as well. So I'm assuming that most of the attendees here today are probably residential folks, but yeah, just as an example that Cal Water is a large company, and yeah, we also support sorry, yes?
Margaret, you might mention that other cities have rebates.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, most cities have.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So Pat had just said that for me to talk about how other cities, so Cal Water mostly services San Mateo. So if you're a San Mateo resident, it's likely that you would be eligible for any of these rebate programs. But it's kind of patchwork depending on the, we're a statewide organization or agency, but we don't service everyone in the Bay Area. So we also service South San Francisco, Coma, San Mateo, and then more down like in the Southern Peninsula, like San Carlos and Redwood City. But anyway, so maybe some local ones like Millbrae, and we don't service. But like Pat was saying, these programs are not specific to Cal Water, or the Smart Landscape Tune-Up I think is like pretty unique, which is why I encourage everyone to take advantage of it. But in general, most water utilities across California have some type of water conservation program and therefore rebates available to their customers. So yeah, if you're not a Cal Water customer, I definitely do encourage you to check that out, and I can even assist in helping with any of that if you need. But I was gonna tie that in at the end, but it's a great opportunity to do that now. But yeah, across California, most companies have at least something available for their customers, and most are very similar. But yeah, just to finish up with this example, it's just a commercial example of a multifamily apartment complex where they had all this work done completely free of charge. 2 16-station weather-based smart irrigation controllers were installed. 8 broken drip lines were repaired. 87 precision nozzles were installed as well, and 3 broken anti-siphon valves and 6 broken pop-ups were replaced as well. So yeah, a very comprehensive workup. Great opportunity for any of our customers, residential or commercial. So moving on, this is just the link to the website and a little QR code if anybody, but we can share that at the end as well. So moving on.
Okay. So, and I know we've covered a lot of concepts here, but we're getting close to kind of wrapping this up and getting to some Q&A. Good time to think about some of the topics that we've covered and input your Q&A into the chat. But let's talk a little bit about maintenance. Again, I gathered this list from rescape.org. They do a good job at covering regenerative landscape practices. And when I think about how to maintain a landscape from the ideal perspective, and this is definitely not how all landscapes are maintained, in large part based on budgetary constraints. Because these things at first take money to get going, but once you do, you can really create a landscape that can be self-sufficient versus requiring ongoing synthetic fertilizers, exorbitant amount of chemicals to keep pests away because we've got the wrong plant in the wrong place. But let's go through the list. Rescape, ideally you can find a rescape professional on the team as part of your gardener search or your landscape contractor professional search. Site analysis with a maintenance manual would be ideal for any landscape. We should be using grass cycling if we do have grass, and that's the concept of not bagging the grass and taking it away to throw it away, but rather use the grass clippings as mulch. Producing mulch on site, not always easy, but if you can do it, what a great opportunity. Produce a compost on site. No plant trimmings to the landfill. If you can reach that goal, what an opportunity. Again, it has everything to do with trying to get plants that are appropriately sized for the space that they're in. And then what you're down to is just small amounts of structural pruning and using those clippings back in the landscape somehow. It's a high bar, but great to use. Ideally not using sheer hedges, right? The idea of not using mechanical equipment, the idea of not giving plants a haircut, but rather from a horticultural standpoint, really using hand pruners to prune what really should be pruned on a plant that's not overly sized for the space that it's in. Great opportunity, but difficult. And I would say 90% of the landscapes in the Bay Area are not that. So a long way to go. Make sure that we're not compacting our soil. So the concept of having mulch down, the concept of protecting our soil against compaction. Compaction can come from rain, ironically enough. The energy of a rain droplet hitting our clay, fine soil can super compact and create a tiny crust that doesn't allow water to penetrate in a meaningful way, and it creates a situation for our irrigation system having runoff or water just going straight to the gutter. The concept of using compost, which we talked about, using only organic fertilizers if possible, reapplying, and the reason behind organic fertilizers is synthetic fertilizers can be loaded with salts, they can be loaded with chemicals that kill the local beneficial insects that can really get the soil in a state of not supporting what the natural ecosystem should be. So working away from synthetic fertilizers, away from synthetic pesticides is a very high bar, but can be done if, again, we get the right plant in the right place and apply the right amount of water. Has everything to do with making sure that we don't have a shade-loving plant in the sun, or worse yet, a sun-loving plant in the shade. While it might live, it might be far more susceptible to pests and issues that need to be dealt with, typically by synthetic fertilizers or fungicides or pesticides. It's a tough deal. Read a dedicated meter that's looking for leaks. Check the irrigation equipment regularly. Use an integrated pest management program for maintenance. And that what that is to say is, if I see a pest outbreak that I'm treating in a very acute way in the area that's impacted, only if it's needed. In some cases, we might have small pest outbreaks that are just something that's seasonal, that won't really detract from the plant's health in a meaningful way, won't necessarily detract from an aesthetic standpoint in a meaningful way. So the concept of having a pest management program that is really just working in an acute manner versus a broad spectrum manner would really reduce the amount of chemicals applied to our landscapes. And I think something to consider for folks that have a gardening service or folks that have a commercial landscape partner. The idea of seeing these guys spray things out in the landscape, do we really know what they're spraying? We're running our dogs out there. We've got our kids out there. We're saying we want to keep and make spaces for us to play and spend time out in the landscape. But do we know what chemicals are being applied and how safe those are for, again, the beneficial insects, our domestic pets, whether that's cats, dogs, whatever it may be, whether it's our kids out there, what's really being applied? And can we just get at the root of the issue by initially designing with landscape practices that get the right plant in the right place? This one is a slide that Margaret will touch on.
So yeah, kind of with all that said, we, like, as we're just wrapping up here, I just wanted to include this slide to drive home the point that all these things that we've talked about today and making those improvements, adjustments in your own home can really lead to a great savings, conservation, water conservation wise and financially. So yeah, as the diagram shows, in our mid-peninsula district, so that's where San Mateo is located. In 2002, our customers helped save over 10.5 million gallons of water, and specifically by making, and that's across with all of our different conservation programs, but specifically just with the irrigation equipment and landscape upgrades, they helped save 26.2 million gallons. So again, I think we're just trying to emphasize the point that these small changes really do matter in the grand scheme of things, and really can help save yourself a lot of water and California a lot of water in general. So yeah, thank you to anyone who is helping that. And yeah.
Okay, bringing it all together, and this is our second to the last slide, the concept of why. So I think more than anything, the point of our presentation is to cover a lot of topics on how to best set your landscape up for success, how to best set our state, our future up for success. And it does boil down to conserving water from a design standpoint, from a maintenance standpoint. We've offered a lot of resources. I would strongly suggest that you visit your water provider's website. Cal Water does a great job. They have some very generous rebate programs to offset the initial investment tied to doing some of these retrofits or getting the landscape up to those minimum building codes, which should be our goal. And I appreciate the time. And do you have any last thoughts?
No, I think that really covers it. And yeah, just thank you so much for being here today. And yeah, please visit our website or ask me if you have any questions after.
Okay, I've got one last thing before we open up to questions. And it's just a quick thing. It's a irrigation demonstration. And I think more than anything, the point I really wanted to try to get home is for everybody here, your irrigation system, if it does have a drip system, one of the critical pieces is having a filtration system for the downstream. All of those small components that are inherent with a drip system's design and manufacturing can be very susceptible to clogging. The concept of being able to access and understand that preventative maintenance is required for our irrigation system is important. I think by and large, the way landscape irrigation gets maintained is from a very reactive standpoint. Something's dying, go fix it. Well, if we would just do a little bit more on trying to maintain the system from a proactive approach, we can really save on the plant replacement costs. And then lastly, what I wanted to touch on is the concept of having these pop-up sprinklers installed at an appropriate height and making sure that this pop-up height covers whatever plant material you have it. They design these sprinklers in 2-inch, 3, 4. This is a 6-inch pop-up sprinkler. They have a 12-inch pop-up sprinkler. The concept is if you do have a pop-up sprinkler, that it's popping up to the level that's appropriate to cover the plant material it's irrigating. And I brought irrigation nozzles for all of our in-person attendees. And I just wanted to go through another important component. Again, it's this preventative maintenance tied to filtration. By and large, this irrigation nozzle can spray even 15 to 18 feet. So to take that device that's irrigating a portion of your landscape that is fairly large in terms of square footage and have it get clogged and have a large portion of the landscape become dry because we aren't maintaining the filter, or we're not adjusting the nozzle correctly, or we're not getting it just so in place so that it's watering the landscape and not overspraying the siding and adjacent sidewalks, I think is important. So with that small demonstration, we wanted to open up to questions. If there's anybody from Zoom attendees that have questions, please let us know. Any of our in-person attendees, we're happy to answer questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have old style that has sprinklers, different kinds, but on the lawn, I don't know if I call it just the irrigation one,
Mhm.
slightly pops up maybe.
Mm.
What do you call that one?
Pop-up sprinkler.
Pop up. Can it be converted to the one that you have?
Absolutely. Yes, it absolutely can. And I think that's
the
important.
question, please.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. Attendees, front yard, we have, she mentioned she's got pop-up sprinklers in place, but it sounds like it's a small pop-up.
Yes.
And can I take that old system and convert it into some of what we've talked about today? The answer is yes. There's rebates available for that. So you can take the small pop-up that you have in place and potentially install something that's a little bit larger. All of this is underground. And I think this slide identifies an important component to get the sprinkler at the right height, a swing joint installed at the base of this sprinkler, and the sprinklers installed at grade, and it just pops up high enough to cover. So one, we want to make sure that it's popping up high enough. Two, the small component on the top is called a nozzle, and that's where all of the important water efficiency pieces are. You can go to Cal Water. I believe they have a rebate to take old sprinklers and install new ones. So they're pressure compensating. That's an important piece because we talked about too much pressure. You might be feeling they've got a rebate for that. So we can change the type of sprinkler. And then we can also change the nozzle. The nozzle is probably one of the weak links that's in your yard right now. If we get a high efficiency nozzle, which they almost cover the entire cost of, and all it is unscrewing this and screwing this back in, you can get a high efficiency rotating nozzle that would apply the water in your front yard more evenly, more efficiently. So the answer is yes. Yes, ma'am.
Talking about drainage. Chips, it's water as well,
You know-
or just maybe the work up.
Well, no, it's so two things there. And the question is, does redwood chips, does that help in terms of mulch? Well, or should I just stick with compost? A little bit of both. I think conceptually speaking, I like applying compost to the soil surface. If I have wood chips or mulch that has dissipated, I like applying 1/4 to 1 inch of compost prior to me installing my wood chips or mulch. Mulch and wood chips is one of those terms that's really broad in nature, and it can be anything. And what I mean by that is, it could be redwood chips, it could be any number of wood chips, it could be ground up landscape trimmings. That can all be a form of mulch. And there's advantages and disadvantages to any of them. But conceptually speaking, compost is great to have at the soil surface. Having bigger material like mulches, like the redwood chips that you described, those kind of eating insects, that ecosystem wants those tiny little insects love the different varying sizes of material. And what you want is to have those materials breaking down, putting out nitrogen to the landscape, but more than anything, helping create that soil sponge to really try to create a landscape that has enough organic matter that holds on to water and reduces evaporation based on not having the soil surface open to just direct sun. You bet.
It's a Zoom question.
Okay. Are there any good tricks to prevent animals from biting, chewing on drip irrigation lines? That is a challenge. And what I would suggest looking into, and this is something that I don't have completely proven out, but I'm testing this year, and that is there are irrigation injection systems. The manufacturer name is Easy Flow. That they have additives that they're using in the agricultural world that are helping with chewing rodents. So I don't have a super clean answer for you on that, but I'm testing something now, and I think it's worth looking at that manufacturer and pushing a little bit because it's very interesting conceptually to not have those small components chewed up. I do think there's a bigger problem with drip systems in general having too many components. And I would really suggest an inline drip irrigation system that the emitters are inside the tubing, embedded inside the tubing, versus having all of these small components that I think can have issues with chewing pests, largely rodents. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to say in the rose garden here at Central Park, we do have some problems with roads. We have Netafim, so it's an inline knitter, but still there's evidence of doing, and we do have to periodically replace some tubing. Also, as far as compost and mulch, we also yearly apply, we get our garden compost from Linkso, so Arboretum members do get a discount at Linkso, and then we use their arbor mulch. Terry Linkso recommends that, and it's a mixed mulch. We used to use the fir bark, medium fir bark, but we've switched several years ago to using their arbor mulch, which Terry says is really good for the soil.
I completely agree.
Yeah,
It's the varying sizes of particles. So versus just having big wood chips, having those varying sizes of particles, I think really helps the whole process. Yes, ma'am.
I just had a question, because I've been on the website before and I'm gonna be replacing my lawn.
Oh, awesome.
It's dead right now. It hasn't been watered except for the rain. So you're supposed to take a picture of a before and then after to document the process. to
That's
get the
right.
rebate. Is that correct? So even if it's dead now, I can still take a picture of the lawn and submit that, or do I have to bring the lawn back?
Right, so unfortunately, there are some terms and conditions to the program. And since it's a statewide organization, they can be kind of strict about that. And yeah, so one of them is that it does have to be live before you can get rebated, which I understand can be very frustrating.
Yeah.
But yeah, from what I understand, that is one of the terms and conditions of the program.
All right, that was my question, because I got this all down on your website. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
definitely. Yeah, there are a couple, and just for transparency, yeah, it's also very important to apply and be approved before you start any work. It's also important, yeah, there are lots of kind of very specific rules, but
Is there a kind of a time frame? Because what I was gonna do is take pictures, and then as it gets into fall, I was from Linkso, I was gonna buy compost, then you put the cardboard down, the rolling cardboard that they have,
oh, right.
and then compost and mulch on top of that, and then in the spring, replant after the soil has been reconditioned.
Yeah, I
Is
think,
that about the time frame you got?
yeah, I think. that-
Get it a couple of months ahead to go ahead and put that in?
Yeah, yeah, and then also, from start to, once you're approved, you have 90 days. If that, was that what you were asking?
Yeah, what I was gonna do is take a picture of the lawn.
Okay.
Because you have to have a start point.
That's right.
And then in the fall, around November 1st, I was gonna put the compost and the cardboard and the mulch down, and then in the spring, replant.
Right.
But it has to be 90 days from start to finish.
Yes, yeah, like once you apply and are approved, and then once you to finish, but you can apply for an extension. That can be like up to 30 days.
I would talk out your approach because I think you're approaching it right through sheet mulching, and it's definitely by far the best way of doing it for our environment. The concept of putting that compost down, using the sheet mulching, cardboard material. And, depending on what type of grasses you're trying to get rid of, some time is required. It would be good to allow for that time. So it makes sense. I would just reach out and explain.
And file for an extension to make sure
Mhm.
it's completely, the soil's reconditioned before I plant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I have a follow-up question to the amending the soil and then your conversation about native plants.
Mhm.
From what I've researched and what one of your slides showed is that native plants do not like soil amendment. That's what your slide said, since you're hands-on, is that your experience?
Well, there's a few species that are very specific about not having too much organic matter, but by and large, I have a ton of natives being tested at my house. I don't see that being an issue, but I think you should dig in and research exactly what natives you plan on using. That generalized statement that natives don't like the soil amended, well, it depends on what kind of soil you have. And by and large, in our kind of urban spaces, we have soil that's had the organic matter sheared off of it completely. It's true that natives in their native state, they wouldn't want to have any organic matter added. But you getting to just a state of normal organic matter that would match our kind of native ecosystem of those natives that you're using, it likely needs work anyways. So I wouldn't shy away from organic matter. You might need to make some minor touches, but I would dig in. It's very species specific that really don't want any organic matter. And that's a small amount of natives that
So
fit that bill.
using some compost
Yes,
is probably acceptable.
yeah,
And then
absolutely.
using the standard mulch.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Because they also recommend rock instead of tar.
No, I disagree. I disagree with the concept of rock as a mulch. It can be very for the natives as well. Yeah, by and large, I think what should happen is I feel like plants should be creating their own organic matter. Once they're large enough, their own leaves and droppings create the organic matter that really makes sense to them. And then it gets back to that concept of right plant in the right place and not over shearing it, and let it drop its natural leaves and leave them underneath the plant and let it create its own organic matter. But the concept of putting a rock layer in between, for more than one reason, plant health being one of them, but just our kind of overall temperature index of our cities. When I travel to Southern California or just the Southwest, the concept of all of our landscapes being covered with rock, I think, is a mistake. And I don't think it's needed by and large for 99% of the plants that you would put in your yard, and natives being a part of that. I don't think you're going to run into that. Really. I think the hard part for California is it's such a big state. When we talk about natives, well, it's natives to this area of the state, whereas I think maybe some of those natives in the southern part of the state probably may appreciate rock mulch. Got it. I hear you. I think more than anything, well-drained soil. So rock as a mulch, as a layer on the top, I don't agree with, but the concept of having finite aggregates in our soil to help water infiltration, that's a big part of it. So part of the amendments that we do at our company isn't just organic matter. We might, if it's heavy clay soil, we might work in small rock material to really help with moving water through the soil a little bit. That might be part of it too. Yeah. Anything else?
I just have one question. I had gotten through Cal Water last year, Flume.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't mention anything about that, and
That's
I attached it to my water meter,
excellent. And
and it's connected, and I
Okay.
get notices when my irrigation goes on,
excellent.
and if there's a leak or anything,
Excellent.
comes to my phone. and I know
Great.
it.
That's awesome. Unfortunately, that is an example of one of the programs that were drought specific that we no longer are rebating, but it is a really great example of a great tool. We just aren't providing a rebate for it right now, but yeah, it's a great tool, great, a lot of our customers who did take advantage of it really like it. Yeah, it can send you,
Yeah, if I can expand on that a little bit, the comment was I got a flume meter, that it's an add-on device that you put on top of your water line, and it gives you all of those alerts that we
Yeah.
talked about, that some advanced water meters and water districts are
Yeah.
experimenting with. But being able to get imagine being out of town and being able to
Right.
get that alert, it's amazing. And a low cost, even if it's not rebated. I think these meters, maybe between $300 and $500. There are other water providers in the Bay Area that are still supporting the concept, and these programs shift and tweak. But at the end of the day, the concept of having sensors tell us what's going wrong in our lives, that's one of them, and a great investment.
right, very valuable.
All right.
All right. Well, with that, we definitely appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll be hanging around with for any additional questions for the next 5 or so minutes.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren and Margaret,
Thank
for an excellent and detailed explanation of how we can save water. I know I'm gonna be checking out those websites.
Awesome,
Very good.
thank you.
Well, thanks so much.
In a few days, everyone will be emailed a link to a recording of the presentation and an evaluation form. Any unanswered questions can be addressed at that time. We'll appreciate feedback on what worked and where we can improve. Please join us for future seminars and workshops. On August 6th, our free seminar will be Orchids at Home, Easier Than You Think, with Dan Williamson. He's president of the San Mateo Orchid Society. And a huge thank you to Margaret and Lauren for today's interesting program, and to Kevin Wilkinson, our president, for handling the technical part of our program. The Arboretum Society has a variety of volunteer opportunities from the greenhouse, nursery, education committee, someone to help with Zoom setups, and more. Let us know if you're interested by completing the evaluation form or emailing us at info@sanmateoarboretum.org, or leave a message at 650-579-0536. Thank you for joining us today. The program is now finished.
Thank you.